Hello, Year 11. This is a video about Buddhism and craving, and what Buddhism teaches about craving, and with a focus on how to answer a 15-mark question about Buddhism and craving. So let's start from the beginning. So the teachings about craving in Buddhism are from the Four Noble Truths, which were the first teachings given by the Buddha after he got enlightened. They're from a part of the Pali Canon called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. It's the most famous part of the Pali Canon because it was the very first teaching, and some people say the most important teaching. Now, the Four Noble Truths are the basis for a lot of what Buddhists believe, especially in Theravada Buddhism. So here are the Four Noble Truths. The first truth is suffering, that everybody suffers in the world. The second is the cause of suffering. That's what we're going to look at today. The third one is the end of suffering, the fact that you can put an end to your suffering, which is by getting to nirvana or enlightenment. And the fourth is the path to the end of suffering, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. So today we're going to look at the second one. And the second one is, in the Buddhist term, it's Tanha, T-A-N-H-A, Tanha, which is craving. So the idea is that craving, wanting things, or sometimes called selfish desires, is the cause of all suffering according to Buddhism. So let's have a look at what the Buddha says. So this is what the Buddha says to his first students or monks in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta in the Pali Canon. He says, now this, bhikkhus, which actually means monks or it can mean students, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving which leads to re-becoming, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there. That is craving for sensual pleasures, craving for becoming, and craving for disbecoming. So you can see how in Buddhism there is a link between suffering and continuing to be reborn in samsara. It says here, it is this craving which leads to re-becoming. Re-becoming means rebirth. So the idea is that if you didn't crave, then you wouldn't suffer, and if you weren't suffering, then you wouldn't be reborn in samsara. You'd get to nirvana and never be reborn again. The other thing to note here is that at the end he talks about three kinds of suffering: sensual pleasures, craving for becoming, and craving for disbecoming. We're going to have a look at these. Now, this is part of the work that you're going to do with this video. You need to make a note of these three kinds of suffering, what they are, and also how they lead to suffering. And to understand that, you're going to have to listen to what I say, not just read off the slides. So, kama tanha is craving for sensual pleasures. So that's craving for experiences or things or thoughts that bring pleasant feelings. So it can be food, it can be going somewhere you like to go on holiday, it can be spending time with friends, anything that you enjoy, basically, playing computer games, whatever it is, anything that you enjoy is kama tanha. And this is the easiest one to explain how it brings suffering. So the Buddhism would say this: if you crave something, say you crave a certain kind of food, there's three options on that. Either you can't get it, remember, you can't have that kind of food, it's not available, or you can't afford to buy it, or you get it and then it's gone. So obviously with food, that's an obvious one. You get it, you eat it, it doesn't provide you with any lasting satisfaction, it's just gone. Or sometimes you crave something and when you get it, you find that you don't crave it anymore. Your craving just goes on to something else. So, an example of that might be you really crave, an example I was given by a student once was they really craved a certain pair of shoes that they wanted. They got them for Christmas. When they got the shoes, they were like, fine, I've got these shoes, but it didn't really make them any happy. They just wanted something else then. Their craving went on to something else. So that's craving for sensual pleasures. Craving, bhavatana, is craving for being. Now this is the craving on a basic level, a craving to exist, that everyone wants to exist. It also can include the craving to have a certain status, to be rich, powerful, famous, and so on. Now again, it's quite clear how this leads to suffering. Craving to exist, well, everybody dies one day. We are as impermanent as anything else in the world. So it means that you cannot, that craving cannot always be satisfied. Also, if, a rich person might lose their wealth one day, a famous person is going to lose their level of fame, and so on and so on. So any kind of status you get in society is going to disappear one day. Vibhavatana is the strangest one. So this is the third one. Vibhavatana is craving for non-existence. That's the desire not to exist. So it includes the idea that some people just don't want to exist at all. The Buddha was similar to the psychologist Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud felt that we had both a desire to exist and a desire not to exist at the same time, which is an interesting thought, but the Buddha thought that was true. Now, on that level, it's again clear from a Buddhist point of view why that desire can never be satisfied, because as well as saying that people will always go out of existence when they exist because everyone dies, Buddhism believes that if you die and you're not enlightened, you'll get reborn. So if you desire non-existence, even if you die, then you'll come back to exist in a different form in your next life. So it will never be completely satisfied, that desire. The desire to cease to exist could also include more everyday kind of feelings, like, I don't know, that feeling of embarrassment where you feel like, oh God, I've said something embarrassing, or something embarrassing has happened, and you want sometimes the phrase people use is they want the earth to open up and swallow you. Again, that's another kind of desiring to cease to exist in some way, according to Buddhism. So those are the three kinds of craving. Most of the time when we talk about it, we'll be focused on the top one, Kama Tanha. Okay, so this is the main body of what we're going to do in this, your work you're going to do. So you've got now an explanation of craving and how it leads, and the three kinds of craving, how they lead to suffering. But a 15-mark question you may be asked is like, is it true? Is it correct, the Buddhist teaching? Craving leads to suffering. Discuss this statement. So that'd be the 15 marker. So what we're going to do is, first of all, I want you to take notes on different points of view on this thing. I'd want you to take notes on at least 4 points of view. The reason I'm going to get you to do 4, even though you only need 3 in an essay, is because it depends how what the essay title is. You might not always be able to use all of these points of view to address the statement, because statement could be of different kinds. So first of all, on your page, I want you to put that title, Craving Leads to Suffering, discuss this statement. Then I'm going to go through 5 points of view, and I want you to explain 4 of them on your paper. If you can, think of ways to criticize each point of view. That would be good. You don't have to, but if you can. There is one where I'm going to talk you through a criticism, but you don't have to put criticisms down for each one, but if you can, that would be good. When we've finished, I'm going to talk you through an SCE plus E paragraph, and I want you to then to write another SCE plus E paragraph using some of the ideas that I've gone through. Not the same ideas that I do in my SCE paragraph, but your own one. Okay, so let's go to the first point of view, and this is going to be the only reason to agree with the statement here. So we're only going to have one reason to agree, and that's the most basic Buddhist reason. So I've already said this basically. So all craving leads to suffering, because either we will not get what we crave, or the thing we crave will be lost one day. So this is very clearly linked to the Buddhist teaching of impermanence, or anicca. And when you're explaining your ideas, I would make this link, explain that there's a link to anicca. Buddhism teaches that all things are impermanent, nothing lasts forever. This means that anything we crave, whether this is like a material possession, a loved one, even our own life, will one day be taken from us. Therefore, Buddhism says we'll be happier if we didn't crave those things in the first place. Nice and simple, but it's that link to anicca to say, well, Buddhism teaches everything's impermanent, therefore whatever you crave is going to disappear. That's what gives you, you'd get more likely to get your points in your paragraphs if you include that idea. So that's the first reason. Okay, all the others are going to be reasons to disagree. And the first two I'm going to put are going to be non-Buddhist points of view. So these are from the non-Buddhist point of view. Remember, in an essay, you need to do 2 Buddhist points of view. Only one can be non-Buddhist point of view. So, from a non-Buddhist point of view, you could say the idea that suffering is caused by craving seems cruel. I think we talked about this in lessons. So, for example, take the case of someone who's starving and who has nothing to eat. Now, if you look at the Buddhist teaching, it almost seems like they're saying, well, the reason they're suffering, this starving person, perhaps in some third world country where they've got no food, the reason why they're suffering is because they crave food. If they just would stop craving food, then they would not be suffering. Well, that seems really cruel from our point of view, doesn't it? It seems like we would say, well, they're suffering because they've got no food. They haven't got anything to eat. That is the cause of their suffering, not the fact that they crave food. Another example on a more day-to-day level, perhaps would be bullying. So we would say, if we saw someone being bullied, we would say, well, they're suffering because of the actions of the bully. This person is treating them unkindly, being horrible to them, and so on and so on. However, Buddhism seems to be saying that, again, it's craving. They crave to have good friends or to be left alone or not to be picked on. And if they didn't crave that, then they wouldn't be suffering. So why don't they just stop craving it? Again, it seems cruel. We would say it's not their fault, it's the bully's fault in that situation. So it looks like Buddhism is sometimes blaming the victim for their suffering. However, this is the one where I think Buddhism's got a good response. There's a story in the Pali Canon about the Buddha and a hungry man. And this story is used by Buddhists to kind of defend themselves against this criticism that they're being cruel. So in the story from the Pali Canon, a man who has not eaten all day comes to see the Buddha teach. I can't remember the exact story behind it, but he hasn't been able to eat all day and he really wants to see the Buddha teach. But the Buddha refuses to teach until the man has eaten, because he says it's impossible for a man who is hungry to listen to the Dharma and put it into practice. In other words, this man would not be able to follow what he was saying, would not be able to put the Dharma into practice until he'd had some food to eat, because he'd just be distracted all the time by the fact he was so hungry. Now, that's interesting, because you might say, well, if he was a real Buddhist, why didn't he just stop craving any food? Well, the way Buddhism thinks of it like this is they say, we cannot overcome our craving at the time when we're experiencing extreme suffering. So if you go to a starving person and say, look, stop craving, they can't do it because they're too concentrated on their suffering. In the same way, if someone's being bullied very badly at school, you can't just go up to them and say, right, become a Buddhist and stop craving, because they're suffering too much. They're too unhappy to concentrate on the Buddha's teachings. So what the Buddhists would say was yes, they would say it's true. If you got to the level of the Buddha, you got to enlightenment, they would say, well, then the Buddha wouldn't suffer when he was starving. I don't know what we think about that, but that's what Buddhists think. They think the Buddha was so free from craving that if he was starving, he wouldn't care. If he was being bullied, he wouldn't care. If he got in some kind of car accident, I know there weren't cars around that time, but if he did, he wouldn't care, because he's so free from wanting anything. He doesn't want to have food. He doesn't have any desire to not be in the car accident, have any desire to have more friends. He's fully happy in himself, whatever happens to him. But, and this is the important thing, Buddhism would say that that's only for people who reach the top level of Buddhism, who could get in that position. For most people, they would say, it's impossible for them to stop their craving when they're experiencing such terrible suffering, when they're starving and so on. So Buddhism actually doesn't say that we should say to people who are in terrible suffering, oh, just stop craving. It says we should take away their suffering and then they can start to practice Buddhism. So that's the response. And I think it's quite a good one from Buddhism. Okay. Another non-Buddhist reason to disagree would be simply to say that craving is good, because life's all about getting what you crave and making yourself happy in that way. So, if you like going to Roller World, then a happy life is a life where you go to Roller World a lot. If you like cake, then a happy life is eating lots of cake. Now, this is a kind of view that you'd associate with someone like Jeremy Bentham, who was the founder of Utilitarianism. He thought a happy life was one with lots of pleasure. That's how he defined happiness. So in other words, you could get as much as you can of the things that you like, that you crave. And that's completely against the Buddhist point of view. Buddhism is saying, get rid of your cravings, and Utilitarianism is saying, just get what you crave and then you'll have a happy life. Now, of course, Jeremy Bentham, all utilitarians, those people, they know that things don't last forever. They're well aware of what Buddhism's, that Buddhism is right when Buddhism says things are impermanent. If you go to Roller World, it's not going to last the rest of your life. It's just going to last for a bit. But what utilitarianism would say is, well, a good life is just, you get the things you crave, then they disappear, then you get the other more things you crave, and so on and so on. And so it's just about getting as many of the things that you crave. And that it's better to have a life where you crave lots of things, get lots of those things, and they disappear, than a life where you just don't want anything. You just kind of sit in your house bored, or not bored because you don't even crave not being bored, but just a kind of flat existence. They would say that is a more exciting existence, to crave things, to get some of those things, than to just think, oh, I won't crave anything in case I don't get what I crave. So that's a kind of straightforward criticism of Buddhism. Okay, my next 2 points of view are going to be Buddhist points of view, but Buddhist points of view to disagree that craving leads to suffering. Now, the first one comes from a Japanese Buddhist group called Soka Gakkai International, or SGI. They are Japanese, but they're also an international group. They're popular in many different parts of the world, including the Western world. So they follow Mahayana teachings, particularly the teachings of a part of a Mahayana sutra called the Lotus Sutra. And because they follow those teachings, they say that some parts of the Pali Canon, including the Four Noble Truths, are what they call basic level teachings or beginning teachings, teachings that they don't feel they have to follow. So they don't actually believe, it's not they don't believe in the Four Noble Truths at all, but they just think, well, they were appropriate at one time for one group of people, but they're not appropriate now. Now, in fact, this group, far from believing that you need to reject all cravings, they actually say that following their form of Buddhism can bring you the things that you crave. Now, I think we watched a video where there's a guy talking about how he wanted to become a nurse, and he kept failing the exams to become a nurse, and he chanted this mantra that they chant in their form of Buddhism, and eventually he passed his exams and became a nurse. Now that's the kind of thinking that you find in this kind of Buddhism. He craved something, there was something he really wanted. He practiced this form of Buddhism and then he got what he craved. So he didn't want to get away from craving, he actually wanted to get craving, or get the things that he craved. Now the way they get things is by chanting this particular thing, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. It's on your on your slide there. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is the mantra that they chant. So the biggest practice in this form of Buddhism is to chant that over and over again. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And people say that you can get what you crave. So again, a nice simple point of view, because it just a Buddhist point of view that says, no, don't follow the Four Noble Truths, but chant this and you will get the things you crave, and don't give up craving. Of course, there's an easy way to criticize this from a Theravada Buddhist point of view. Theravada Buddhists basically say that the Mahayana Buddhist sutras were just made up, that they're not real Buddhist teachings. So they would just say, well, if you're following Mahayana teachings and not following the Four Noble Truths, you're not really following proper Buddhism. That would be their point of view. Okay, last one. This is a more complicated one, but I think a nice one to put into an essay. So, a reason to disagree that could come from Buddhists. This could come from Buddhists who are even Theravada, because it's just a different way of looking at things, looking at the idea of suffering. So when you look at the Buddhist wheel of life, which we looked at right at the beginning of the course, where you've got the different realms of rebirth, right in the centre of the wheel of life are the three poisons. The three poisons are, according to Buddhist teachings, the things that keep us suffering and trapped in samsara, and they are greed or craving, hatred, and ignorance. Now, the interesting thing there is that in the Four Noble Truths, it just says there's one cause of suffering, craving, but here there are three: craving, hatred, and ignorance. Now, some Buddhists would argue that at a deep level, the real cause of suffering is ignorance, and here's why. So ignorance really means not understanding the world around us properly, And one of the things that Buddhists say we don't understand properly is impermanence. Now, on one level, we know everything is impermanent. We're aware of that. But Buddhism says that on some deep level, we don't know it. We act as if things around us are permanent. So, for example, if we really want something, we act as if when I get that thing, I'll be really, really happy for the rest of my life. I mean, an example here might be romance. In Hollywood movies, it's always that people want to have the ideal partner or whatever it is, and then when they meet that partner, then the film ends as if that's it. The end, that's the happy ending. They're happy forever after. But Buddhism would say, no, it's not like that. It's, relationships are impermanent. One day, the couple's going to split up, or one of the couple's going to die. So either way, that's not happiness ever after. So Buddhism would say here, we're actually ignorant of the fact that we think the things we crave bring us permanent and lasting happiness. So the idea here is that if we truly understood that the world was impermanent, if we weren't ignorant in that way, if we knew and looked at and immediately knew that everything around us was impermanent, then we would never crave in the first place, and then we'd never suffer. So, so they would say, well, actually, it's not really craving that's leading to suffering, it's ignorance. Because ignorance means that you think the things around you are going to bring you permanent happiness, therefore you try and get those things, and therefore you suffer. So ignorance of anicca, or impermanence, is the real cause of suffering there. Okay, those are our 5 points of view. I'm going to move on to look at a paragraph, an SE plus E paragraph that I have written, looking at this last point of view. What I want to do is have a look at the paragraph I've written, read through it. You can make a copy of it into your notes if you want to, but for this work that I want you to do, I want you to write your own SEE plus E paragraph based on a different point of view. It can be a point of view in favour of the quote, to agree with the quote, or to disagree. I don't mind, but I just want you to put your own SEE plus E paragraph. So you're basically putting the notes you've made into a SEE plus E form. So craving leads to suffering, discuss this statement. Here's one of my paragraphs. So statement, some Buddhists would disagree because they think that ignorance is the real cause of suffering. Nice simple statement, you've got the reason. Here's my evidence, and again in Buddhism there's often no quote, so it's got to be the idea. The Buddha taught that we are ignorant at a deep level of some things about the world around us. For example, even though we know on one level that all things are impermanent, we often act like they are not, and that getting them will bring us lasting happiness. Because of this, we crave these things. Therefore, some Buddhists would argue that what is really causing suffering is our ignorance of the world, not craving itself. So I've got the statement, I've got the idea, and then the green part is the explanation. I'm explaining why that idea means they disagree with the quote. Now here's my criticism. This view could be criticised because even if craving is caused by something else, it still leads to suffering. So I think that's a good criticism myself, because basically they're saying, well, ignorance leads to craving and then that leads to suffering. But if you look at the statement, it says craving leads to suffering. So they're not really properly disagreeing with the statement, it could be argued. So that's my SEE plus E. Statement in the red, evidence in the dark blue, explanation in the green, and then evaluation, or I've put it as a criticism, in the purple. So yeah, you should have made notes on 4 of the points of view that I put in the video. And I want you to write your own SEE plus E paragraph based on those ideas. Okay, thank you.